Yeah, with digital signatures, it's going to provide authenticity and non-repudiation, which basically means when you sign something, it proves that you are who you say you are, and you did actually send the email or the message. Again, with a lot of files, you can do digital signatures like on PDFs as well, and it proves that the person who sent it is the one who sent it. Okay, DSS, Digital Signature Standard, can be used through DSA, RSA, and ECDA, or ECDSA, which is going to be Elliptical Curve Cryptography DSA. The birthday attack is going to basically be a collision attack. It's where if you grab two random strings, you're far more likely to find a collision than if you pick a very specific string and then try to find the variables that will make a collision. Okay, key management is the biggest security concern for both. If it's symmetric key, the whole encryption scheme is only as secure as the key storage. If one key gets stolen or compromised, the whole crypto system has now been compromised. If it's asymmetric cryptography, only the cryptography or crypto from one system to that specific target has been compromised. Okay, these are terms just memorize. Registration authority. This does not give certificates. This just proves that the person is who they say they are. Certificate authority generates the digital certificates and maintains the certificate. Certificate revocation list, CRL. Certificates can become revoked, and instances that become revoked is they've been stolen. The person knows it's been compromised. It's then pushed on the CRL. There's also a certificate directory. It's the storage or potentially even a keyring, keychain. Stego. This is the art of hiding data inside of another piece of data. This is not getting a, for example, PSD file and then having multiple layers of information within the same PSD file, because you're not altering the file and inserting or hiding data inside the file. What you're doing is you're just altering the file. You're not hiding data inside of it. The stego would be is you have a JPEG, and then you go to the least significant bit and basically hiding data within inside the code of the JPEG, not within the actual contents of the JPEG. Okay, there's link encryption. This is going to be the full frame encryption, so you're not going to see the source and destination IP or port. Then there's end-to-end encryption, which only the payload changes. So this would be kind of like steganography. Okay, PGP. Pretty good privacy. Definitely something to know for the test. It's been a very pivotal tool within the cryptography realm. Philip Zimmerman is another pretty important person, or VIP within the encryption realm. Know your SHTTP, which is secured HTTP. It's not used anymore, but basically makes use of like PKI, which makes it to where both sides have to have a certificate. HTTPS uses SSL. And SSL, what type of encryption does it use? Asymmetric or symmetric? Both. It does its key exchange through asymmetric and then goes symmetric. Okay, something to memorize. SSL transport layer, and that's why. Pretty picture. SMIME allows you to do encryption, hashing digital signatures. It's a secure MIME, or email. SET, it's basically a defunct protocol, but it was developed by MasterCard and Visa to allow for more secure transactions. So definitely no SET. Okay, IPsec. No IPsec. The IKE protocol for key exchange, the ISACAMP, the Internet Security Association and Key Management Protocol, and the Oakley Protocol. The ESP and AH can work in transport mode and tunnel mode. Know the different attacks. Cipher text only. You only have the crypt stream. Known plain text is you have the plain text and its associated crypt stream. Chosen plain text is you can choose whatever the plain text is going to be to generate the cipher text. And then chosen ciphertext is you get to choose what ciphertext it is, so when you brute force it, you now know what to decrypt. So when you have the chosen ciphertext attack, pretty much you have access to everything that they need. You're just trying to get the keys so you can reproduce it at a later time. Okay, is everybody comfortable with the man in the middle versus replay? Replay, basically you grab everything that goes over the wire, then you basically put it in your system and then replay it. Like I was mentioning with that Wi-Fi Zoo program, you can do replay of authentication sessions on Wi-Fi. So if somebody basically authenticates into a bank website, if you catch the cookie or the authentication portion, and the cookie basically says this user is authenticated with this IP, and if the conditions are right, you can load it into your browser and then log in as that authenticated session without having to know the username and password, because they're authenticated at that specific time. Man in the middle, basically you just try to intercept all traffic. Need to know coax, base 2 and base 5, STP and UDP, shielded twisted pair versus unshielded. Memorize that. Fiber. And know which one's going to be longer run. Is it going to be a unshielded twisted pair or a fiber line? Fiber. The attenuation on sound is going to be a lot less than the attenuation on light. Okay, attenuation. Degradation is signal as it travels. Basically everything's a wave, so even fiber is going to have attenuation because it is a light wave versus a sound wave. And that's also why it's faster than sound. Okay, crosstalk. Bouncing from one wire to the other wire. Everybody comfortable with analog versus digital? Analog is not your 1-0 off-on switch. It is going to be, for example, a wavelength. And out of that specific wavelength, the majority of it's going to be, let's say, above 5 volts. So if it's above 5 volts, the majority of it, then it's going to be seen as a 1, versus the majority of it being lower than 3 volts, it's going to be seen as a 0. That's how the majority of networks, like for example on copper, is going to be seen, is voltage commands. So for example, 3 is going to be 0, 5 is going to be higher. If you have a lot of electricity going through the line, that's why you can see it sometimes where there's 7. And then sometimes the network devices try to compensate for that. So if the spikes are like 7 or 9, either A, that can fry the device, or they can start to see that the 5s are no longer 5s, 5s are going to be 7s, and the 0s are going to be anywhere from 3 to 5. So you may train the hardware wrong. Baseband versus broadband. Baseband, your digital signaling, twisted pair coax, and broadband is going to be your higher bandwidth. Need to know what plenum is. For the plenum rating, basically non-plenum rated cables can give off specific chemicals when burned. Okay, multicast. This right here is basically just a specific IP range. If you're in that IP range, then you can have basically opt-in type communications. This is not a normal IP range to be in. It's basically going to be your, for example, class D. Broadcast. One system communicates to all systems on a specific subnet. For example, with your good old attack. So if you're going through a Smurf attack, you send an ICMP packet to the broadcast address. Let's say if you have 192.168.1.0 network. 0 is going to be the network address because that's the very bottom part of the network, or bottom part of the subnet or IP address range. Then the broadcast is going to be the very top part of the IP address range. So the broadcast address is going to be 192.168.1.255, and the network is 192.168.1.0. So if you send an ICMP packet to the 255, it's basically going to hit the broadcast address and then try to hit everybody else. Okay, LAN, MAN, and WAN. Everybody comfortable with those? You're probably not going to come across terms such as campus area network or CAN, but
SAN?
yeah.
No.
For a storage area network, you might.
What's that?
For that's be under disaster recovery, business continuity. SANs for storage area network. Know the basic technologies. You're looking at FDDI, CDDI is going to be in your metropolitan area, and your longer range are going to be your frame relay, ATM, and X25. X25's not really used too much anymore. Definitely know the difference between internet, intranet, and extranet. Internet is the world's biggest network. Basically all the countries, all the computers connected into this network can talk back and forth together. The intranet is an internet-like network, so it's going to have your TCP/IP stack, things like that within there, and you might have a web server internally. An extranet is an intranet with remote users, so you have to protect yourself just like you would off the internet, such as firewalls, screen subnets, and so forth. DMZ, basically a screen subnet, but the primary name is a description between the trusted network and the internet. So that's where you're going to have your email servers, your web servers. Usually do not want your database server in this area because that's going to be where you're going to have all your sensitive information. But a lot of people will have a screen subnet between the DMZ and their primary server, or potentially a screen subnet beside the DMZ with their data. Bus can either do linear or tree topology. Bus characteristics, basically if one part of the bus fails, then the rest of the bus will also fail. Ring. Sometimes you're going to see this in a lot of larger networks. It basically has it to where it's one ring, and usually a token is passed during that ring. And what ends up happening is the person who's talking grabs the token and says, "It's my turn." If a node fails, it can negatively affect the surrounding nodes. Star just comes down to your switch and your hub. Your most common instance that's going to be your Cat5 cable or even a fiber line, but pretty much anything that you come into contact with some sort of switch or hub. Mesh, multiple connections to multiple nodes. A true mesh is every node connects to every other node. A partial mesh is the more common, to where you're going to have multiple nodes connecting to other multiple nodes, but it's basically going to interconnect where not all nodes connect to all other nodes. The internet is one really big partial mesh, because you're going to have specific, for example, cities having multiple routes to other cities. Memorize. And also memorize. Collision detection, CSMA. Basically, this is going to be used in Ethernet. And CSMA-CA, which is collision avoidance, is going to be used in your wireless technologies, or 802.11. Again, memorize. 802.11b is going to be your 2.4 gigahertz at 11 meg. G is going to be your 2.4 gigahertz at 54. A is going to be 5 gigahertz at 54. And which one's going to be the shorter range? The 2.4 or the 5 gigahertz? Or actually the 5 gigahertz. The higher the number, basically the more up and downs in the frequency. Yeah, the shorter range. Yeah. The throughput on A should be the same as G. So they're both going to be 54. A and G, but the higher the signal, basically the more power you have to push into it because of the energy dissipation from point A to point B. So for example, like 900 megahertz phones, or if you're on that bandwidth, you'd actually get further signals at that same power output than the 2.4 gigahertz. Even though they don't have 900 gigahertz these wireless devices, but. Okay, access point. Usually you'll see AP for the wireless access point. If you do see anything that says wireless, it's probably going to be WLAN, which is wireless local area network.
One thing just to point out to everybody else, when you go back to the previous slide,
Okay.
in the write-up that we have below it, when it mentions web, it's, you have the wrong name.
Yeah, there will
It
be
says
a
protocol.
Oh, it's wrong, yeah.
Right.
Right.
And unfortunately, you'll probably come across that a lot. People fat finger WEP and put protocol when it should be privacy. Thanks for pointing that out. It's definitely very important. The WEP is not protocol. Okay, the WLAN. That's usually when you see the wireless LANs. If you do see WAP, that's usually going to be the wireless application protocol. Okay, WEP, wired equivalent privacy. Again, that's going to be the weak one because the key is shorter, and several other flaws. The IV does not vary enough. WPA2, Wi-Fi protected access. It's the update for WEP. Then WAP, wireless application protocol.
When you went over the WPA before, you'd mentioned something you want to, as long as the password is long enough.
At least for now. The longer the better, because when it comes down to WPA, at least for now, it was, or WEP, you're cracking the algorithm and not the password. So it doesn't really matter how long the password is or what characters you put in there, you're cracking the algorithm. With WPA, at least at this point, you're cracking the password, even though the half of it's already been cracked so far. So what it comes down to is the strength of the password until the rest of the algorithm is broken. There are actually some rainbow tables out there specifically for WPA. So if you have one of the top 1,000 SSIDs, that's the challenge about WPA, is that they grab your SSID and they hash it against your password. So it's going to be unique specifically to that SSID. So again, if you use the default and then put a basic password on there, chances are it's going to be brute forced really quickly. But if you have your own proprietary uncommon SSID or name, which could be your company name or some other numeric number or whatnot, and then a strong password, chances are that's not going to be in the rainbow tables that are floating out on the internet, and chances are people are not going to be brute forcing it. Because within the Church Wi-Fi, they have a rainbow table set specifically for WPA keys, which gets the top 1,000 SSIDs, and then basically a dictionary of 173,000 or some odd number of potential passwords, and then basically makes a database for each individual SSID. Kane also gives you the capability of creating a rainbow table for a specific target SSID. But again, that's going to take a while to generate. But yeah, to protect for WPA, change the SSID to something that's uncommon or not seen very often, and then have a very strong password. And then with that being said, if the individuals that have been coding for like aircrack and stuff keep on their white paper and keep up the research, there's a good possibility that might not even be safe enough either. You may have to go down to like your radius and then start other sorts of authentication, or specifically go and do nothing but VPN. So WAP, Wireless Application Protocol. So it's not a wireless access point. So if you do see the term WAP in the CISSP, read the question carefully, because more than likely it's going to be the actual protocol itself. They're usually going to use AP or access point for the wireless device. But if they're talking about hardware, then WAP could be used. Okay, some of the tools to do war driving. You need to know what war driving is. Basically, it's the act of looking for wireless signal. Looking for SSIDs, MAC addresses, signal strength, and a lot of times GPS coordinates. Okay, memorize. All people seem to need data processors, which is application presentation, session, transport network, data link, and physical layer. That's the OSI stack. And then the internet stack is going to be your application presentation session, which is your application stack. Then you have your transport, which is your host-to-host stack. Then you have your network, which is your internet stack. And then data link physical, which translates to your network access. Common port numbers, anything you've come across. For example, a less common one nowadays is your good old NNTP. How many people here know what port NNTP stands or is pushed on? Yeah, that's your good old news port. The 119. That's one that's not as common anymore as it used to be. You know, IP addresses is 32-bit. MAC address is a 48-bit hardwired. The MAC address is associated directly with the hardware. ICMP, Internet Control Message Protocol, that's going to be at the same layer as IP. So you have IP, ICMP, and then the next layer up is going to be your TCP, UDP. It's good to know the types. Know what SNMP is, and it's going to be port 161 UDP, and trap messages are going to be on 162 UDP. This picture right here, the MIB. The MIB is basically the database that contains all of the OIDs, which are the records. Each individual record has its own corresponding number. So for example, a system ID, number of interfaces, routing table, manufacturer, each one of those is going to have its own specific number, which is a record or OID. So MIB is a relational database, and OID is going to be each record in that database. And that's part of the SNMP. SMTP, basically outgoing email. FTP, File Transfer Protocol, clear text. It listens on 21 by default, and then it drops down to port 20 by default for data transfers. Trivial FTP, it's going to be UDP, File Transfer Protocol. And of course, Telnet, which is clear text. Repeater. Repeater grabs the signal and then amplifies the signal. A switch is a multi-port repeater. So it grabs the signal and amplifies it on every single port. Bridge. Big thing to come across with this is filtering capability forwards frames based on MAC address. It does not forward collision data, and it forwards broadcast data.
What's the difference?
Between that and a router?
Between collision and broadcast data.
Broadcast data would be, for example, like when the subnet, or basically it tells people that this network is looking for these specific systems.
Okay.
With collision, it's going to be bouncing off each other. Okay, switch. Basically just a smart hub, but it's not going to broadcast everything on all ports. It only does it on a very specific port. But it also does amplify the signal. So you can use a switch as a smart repeater. Then VLAN. Basically makes virtual switches. So you can have one physical switch, and then you can have multiple VLANs on that physical switch. And what that's going to do is make a virtual sandbox for every port that's connected to that VLAN. So everybody on this VLAN, VLAN 1, can no longer talk to anybody else on any other VLAN. So you have to be within that virtual system. So basically makes it to where it minimizes on hardware, items like that. It can only be done on a switch. And then you have to have a router to transmit from one VLAN to a second VLAN. In reality, there's other ways of doing it, but for the switch, that's basically test. That's what you need to know. It's the lowest level. Switch does VLANs, and then routers are able to transfer information from one to the other. Router characteristics. They do not use the MAC. They block broadcast and collision data. And then it works at the network layer, which is going to be your IP layer, not the MAC layer. Okay, Bastion host is a hardened system. Firewall types. Generation 1 is basically your router with an ACL on it. Then there's proxy, which is a more advanced firewall. Your stateful, which basically is that same type of scenario, has the ACL, but has a database on it to say who it was connecting to at what time, and if that's going to be allowed into the network. If it makes it to where you deny any going into the network, but somebody connects out, then that basically makes a pinhole within the network. That's a big issue with things like a go to my PC. A lot of people are trying to block that or ban those type of protocols, because what ends up happening is they use port 80. They go out to the internet, they log into a system out on the outside, and they do HTTP tunneling, and then it allows somebody from the outside to connect into that same service, log in, and because this system connected outbound, the traffic coming back in is now accepted in. So that's a lot of people are able to use services like GoToMyPC to bypass firewalls, proxies, and other type of security devices. So it basically makes it a big security risk.
So internal employees would be installing GoToMyPC
Yep.
on their work computer, going home,
And then doing work at home.
or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or giving it a competition or whatever.
Yeah. So definitely a very valuable utility if you allow that type of connection. But if you don't, a very dangerous utility.
Like in the last domain, we're going to get into like forensics and stuff. We're going to get into like traffic evaluation and stuff.
A little bit. We'll touch on it. Because there's a lot of things that you specifically look for. And I definitely may, especially in breaks, as far as like looking at ethereal and looking at specific traffic content, such as looking for protocols like HTTP or even MSNIM, because you can filter on those and do some pretty good, interesting things. And then, for example, like with Wireshark, you're able to do frame contains and basically search the entire frame as opposed to just parts of the frame for specific keywords, which makes it relatively nice.
And I know there's tools out there that not only then evaluate it, but then block it and stuff.
So, yeah, we'll cover that. The majority of the stuff for the test is to know your incident response if things happen. Of course, the laws, ethics, and items like that. But a little bit about disk forensics, mainly from a higher standpoint. But I'd definitely like to get more detailed in there. One thing that you need to know, which I'll be pounding in everybody's head, is the chain of custody. The biggest thing for laws, ethics, investigation is, and especially real world, chain of custody documentation. Is if anything happens, it needs to be written down, why it happened, how it happened, whenever you get the device, once it's picked up, who picked it up, who transferred it from point A to point B, who put it into the evidence locker, whenever you're looking at it, who took it out of the evidence locker, time-stamped, and if that chain of custody is broken, then it could destroy the whole case, especially if the opposing lawyer's any good. Okay. Placement. Definitely want it probably 2 for a DMZ. So you're going to have your router. Some people will use router as a Generation 1 firewall and just block specific content into the area. Some people will put the router firewall and then their web servers and then another router firewall combo into their internal network. Need to know that basically a DMZ is a screened host. Or a screened subnet, sorry. Okay. Now the different dial-up protocols and authentication protocols. The SLIP versus PPP. The SLIP is the older version. PPP is the replacement. PPP can use PAP, CHAP, and EAP. And then also Cisco has their lightweight EAP protocol called LEAP. Know the difference between the PPTP and L2TP and IPsec. This is an encapsulation protocol. The L2TP does require IPsec for security. And when you have these type of VPNs, you're basically going to have full port access, because once you connect to the VPN, now you are now part of that network. But if you have an SSL VPN, it's only going to be port to port. And if you can have the split tunneling, if you have split tunneling, then you are part of that network and still part of your own network. If you don't, then it basically kicks you off that network and then pushes you to the other network, which is going to be the more secure route to go. I know a lot of VPN clients no longer allow you to do split tunneling, mainly because of security concerns. Because, of course, the users want split tunneling, but the business doesn't. Okay, DNS. It's going to be port 53. UDP for small queries. For large queries and zone transfers, it's going to be TCP 53. And basically, what it contains is your host name to IP address translation. NAT. You basically have a public IP address and a private IP address range, which technically the private IP addresses could be routable IPs, but it's basically you're trying to make it to where those IP addresses are being protected by one device. And it's the NAT, or a NAT device is kind of like a firewall / router. It makes it to where if you have something in that aspect where only one IP address is showing on the internet, if somebody's trying to attack your entire class C that's being protected by that NAT, they won't be able to get to it unless the NAT device has routing capability. However, I have seen a lot of scenarios, this happens all the time, where a bunch of gamers will, of course, get their systems taken over because a specific game has multiple ports that have to be either pinholed or port forwarded to the specific gaming system to be able to allow connections coming in or out. So instead of going through and doing the research to find out what ports need to be open, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll put the gaming system as quote-unquote the DMZ. So they'll do all ports going to that outside IP address and forward to the inside IP address, which basically means that that system is just like sitting out on the internet unprotected. So that's definitely, if you can avoid it, not a good thing to do. Okay, fiber and SONET. You need to know FDDI is going to be your fiber. CDDI is going to be your basically your copper. You can have dual rings or 2 rings for fault tolerance. This right here you need to know as well. Fiber is going to be longer, so there's going to be less attenuation with light than there will be with sound, electricity. Wide area networks, there's going to be the dedicated lines all the way through VoIP. But mainly they want you to know, for example, like X25 and ATM. The numbers, again, memorize. T1 is the 1.544, and T3 is 44.736. POTS, plain old telephone system, and PSTN, which is going to be your public switch telephone network. ISDN have multiple channels. You have the average ISDN lines would usually come with the 2 channels that are 64 and then the D channel. DSL usually works on your basic analog lines. And it basically works at a higher frequency, so you're not going to be able to hear the squealing of the modem or whatnot, but then it gets split off at the not really the POP, but at the DMARC. Does anybody know what a DMARC is? Basically, DMARC is the presence to where the ISP dumps in the phone line into your organization, your home or building or whatnot, and then from that point on is now your responsibility. And usually what they end up doing is they wire it up to there and say, okay, yes, we've tested the DSL or the phone line. We get dial tone on the tip and ring, and we're getting the signal for the DSL coming through clean. So now from that DMARC, you now have DSL. It's now your responsibility to either wire the DSL line there or filter it directly from the, let's say, the punch down block or wherever else is in the organization. A lot of people will do the filtering right there and then run a very specific line to an area to where the DSL is going to be, because that's going to minimize the filters that you're going to have to play with, as opposed to having to put a filter in every single jack within the house. They'll go to the punch down block and then put one filter on the punch down block and then wire it to the different areas that are going to be then rewired to the house. Okay, packet switching, X25 and frame relay. You need to know that the X25 had a bunch of error protection in it, made it very bulky and slow, plus it was slow to begin with. Frame relay, they took a lot of that out, so it's a lot faster. The PVC and SVC for switched virtual circuit and CIR are important terms to know for frame relay. ATM uses a 53-byte fixed cell instead of varied lengths. Of course, there's multiplexing. VoIP, which is going to be your basically your voice over IP. And no PBX, which is going to be private branch exchange. This is going to be used primarily for your good old PSTNs, but you will also hear the terms, for example, like the asterisk PBX. It's a VoIP PBX. So it allows people to do the voice over IP, connect to a system, and then hook that system up to a PSTN line.